Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline, this is Made with Books, and today I have a very German intermission. So I'm gonna premise this by saying that all the books that I talk about in this video, and there's 5, they are all in German and they haven't been translated into English. So if you say I'm not interested in books that I can't read anyway, this is your chance to tune off. But if you still want to know what these books are about, or if you do read German, feel free to stay. Now, as most of you know, Mel from Mel's Brooklyn Adventure and Britta Böhler are hosting Reading German Books 2020, a year-long readathon where we're supposed to read German books, or not just German, but Austrian, Swiss, and any other countries where books are written in German, so it's with regard to the language, not the country. And they sort of have these levels that you can reach, and the lowest level is Neuendorf-Sachsenbande, the lowest point in Germany, as Mel said, that is 3.54 meters below sea level. And that is if you have read anything between 1 and 5 books. So at the point that I'm filming this, I've actually read more, but I'm going to talk about these first 5 books in this video, and once I have read another 5, I will make another video, and hopefully at some point I will read some books that have been also translated into English. Sorry about that. But with the first book, the author has quite a few books that are available in English, just not this one because it's her newest. It hasn't been translated yet. I'm really hoping it will, because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And that is Der Zopf meiner Großmutter by Alina Bronsky. I know that Sean from Sean the Book Maniac loved The Hottest Dishes of the Tartar Cuisine, which is by Alina Bronsky and is available, obviously, judging from the title, in English. She has some other ones translated as well, but that's the one, if you want to check her out, that I would recommend. And this one, her newest, came out, I want to say last year in Germany. And if you translate the title, I guess it would be called My Grandmother's Plat, or Ponytail, or whatever you want to call it. It's a very Bronsky book, and if you don't like a really mean-spirited and dark sense of humor, then you won't like Alina Bronsky, let me say that off the bat. Now with this book you have the narrator, and we meet him when he is still a child and moving with his grandparents from Russia to Germany, and they are sort of moving as refugees, as Jewish refugees, and his grandparents aren't really Jewish, but he is. I can't give more away without like already giving away parts of the story. And yeah, we get things through his perspective, sometimes a bit naive maybe, sometimes very astute observations. And his grandmother is very overprotective, to the point that it actually becomes harmful. So she treats him like he is sick. She immediately takes him to the German doctors who tell her that he's completely fine and healthy, which she refuses to believe. He's not allowed to eat any sweets. He's yeah, not allowed a lot of things. And it's sort of horrible the way he treats him. It's also funny at the same time. It's sort of this absurd comical effect. And the grandmother is what you would call, I guess, politically incorrect to an extreme degree, particularly with regards to Jewish people. But like, don't let yourself be turned off by that from the story. This is obviously not a reflection of what the author thinks, it's just the character. So very important to make that distinction here. And you get throughout the story sort of why she is the way that she is, and how she sort of struggles with certain things and maybe has problems that, you know, at first glance you don't see. And I think that this would be, in that regard, a step up for me from The Hottest Dishes of the Tartar Cuisine, which also has a very strict and horrible grandmother figure, but one that I think is not as much explained why she is the way that she is, and I think it's done better in that book in this way. As I said, a very dark sense of humor. And the grandfather actually falls in love with somebody that isn't the grandmother, and so things develop from there as well. Now, their daughter Maya, who is obviously the protagonist's mother, has died, and this is part of the reason, the way that, you know, the way the grandmother acts, and that is something you realize early on, so that I don't think that is giving away too much spoilers. And yeah, I loved it. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Again, dark sense of humor. If you don't like that, steer clear of this one. If you don't read German, you don't have a choice but to steer clear of it so far. If it does become available on English, I'll be the first to let you know. The next book that I want to talk about is Jägerin und Sammlerin by Lana Lux. I read this on my Easter break, or rather devoured it, I should say. Lana Lux, this is her second novel. Her first was called, or is called, Kukolka, and that has been translated into French, Dutch and Hebrew, but sadly not into English yet. This one, as far as I know, because it's so new, it just came out in, I think, in March this year, hasn't been translated yet as far as I'm aware. As I said, if you want to translate the title, Huntress, and I guess female form of gatherers? I don't know. I thought it was a really good read, but a very difficult one, so right off the bat, trigger warnings. This book deals with anorexia, deals particularly with bulimia, it deals with depression, and it also has rape in it. So a lot of very hard-hitting topics. It is about two sort of main characters. One is Alisa, a young teenage girl at the point where we first meet her in the book, and her mother, Tanya, who have both emigrated from the Ukraine and come to Germany. And Lana Lux, actually, when she was a young child herself, came from the Ukraine and has lived in Germany ever since. As I said, we first meet Alisa as a teenager, and she's working on getting her A-levels, and she's very smart, she's very hardworking, but she is struggling. She doesn't live with her mother. Her father's out of the picture at this point, as when she's a teenager, but her mother has a boyfriend. But she doesn't live with them, she lives with her best friend Masha, who has anorexia. And Alisa herself is dealing with bulimia, and at the point in the beginning of the story, Masha has to go to a clinic. She's been to a clinic before because of her anorexia, and we see particularly Alisa struggle with bulimia, and you know, she's working part-time to finance her high school stuff and living with her friend, and she isn't really helped by her rather cruel mother, who is very overcritical, very self-absorbed, doesn't take Alisa's problem serious, or doesn't even at this point realize that Alisa has lapsed back into her bulimia, and just sees her friend Masha's problems with anorexia, which she sort of acknowledges as a real problem, but refuses to acknowledge her daughter's struggles. And so it's very, very hard to read such a bad relationship between a mother and a daughter, where the daughter is sort of taking on more of the maturity level and sort of takes care more of her mother despite everything that the mother does. It is very fast-paced read, I would say, and yeah, as I said, very hard-hitting. I would definitely recommend this. And we do get, later in the book, we do get the perspective of the mother and sort of get her backstory as well. And you sort of jump back and forth in the narrative, just her dealing, Alisa dealing with her bulimia and dealing with depression, but I think a very worthy book, and also coming to terms, or not really coming to terms with, but just realizing the things about her sexuality, LGBT themes in here as well. The next book I want to talk about is a non-fiction read, and that is Mit anderen Augen. Vom Kind, gehörloser Eltern zum Komponisten by Helmut Oehring. And if you translate it, the title would be With Different Eyes, growing up as a child of deaf parents and becoming a composer. And Helmut Oehring is an experimental German composer. The reason I picked this one up is because Daniel absolutely loves it. Daniel is a coder, so a child of deaf adults. And so yeah, I just wanted to read this one because obviously there's certain connections with the two of them. Daniel also, he's not composing songs, well, he has done that as well, like for his like personal enjoyment, but he does play the piano, so also this musical world, which of course you can't, you can't share with your parents if they are deaf. So yeah, I just wanted to read this one. I thought this was a really interesting read, albeit a bit too experimental for my taste. So Oehring includes a lot of sort of, let me find an example, sort of little texts from his compositions, and if you see it, everything is crossed out here. You have other texts that are just very experimental, sort of just lots of letters and stuff. And I was more interested in the parts where he talked about his sort of personal experience growing up with deaf parents, and also just growing up in Eastern Germany and what that meant, and with regards to him encountering music and coming from more of a like working class environment and then going into the arts. So I enjoyed those parts more than sort of the experimental parts, but at the same time a lot of his art deals with, he incorporates into his compositions like the language of deaf people, and he actually also works with like deaf or hard musicians that are hard of hearing, which I think is really interesting. So in that sense those texts are actually really interesting and cool to look at as well, because you know, like with at least with German sign language, the structure, the grammatical structure is different than the German language, just, you know, when talking. So that was interesting as well. Sometimes there's some really like sad or, you know, scary parts of his story. There's this one where as a child he is on a lake with his father, and the father's in his boat just reading the newspaper, and he's swimming about as a little boy, and all of a sudden he gets caught up in some plants and he's almost drowning, and he's calling for help, but the boat has turned so his father doesn't see him and obviously doesn't hear his screams. And so, you know, sort of the risks that come with that. But luckily the father glances up by pure chance from the newspaper, sees him and jumps in and rescues his son. But you also have really funny stories. So you have one where, well, this one is, it's sort of semi-funny. The camera cut me off in the middle of what I was saying about Helmut Oehring's school anecdote. So I have to go back on this, and if you can tell, the light changed. My battery died. I filmed multiple videos back to back and it just didn't like, I don't know, I guess it also didn't like the sun, so the battery ran out faster than it usually would. But I'm back in no light because the sun is gone at this point that I'm filming now. It's much later in the day. But yeah, I'm back. So as I said, he was shooting with an air rifle gun, and they had sort of an intervention at the school about it. And so beforehand he told his parents that his grades were down and there was a chance that he would have to repeat the year. So that's what his parents expected coming in. And so then he had to translate the meeting. So they were sort of saying, you know, with all this happening, you might have to, you know, go into a foster family, and it's very serious. And he was sort of like talking about the grades and his translation in sign language. And the tricky thing is, if you don't speak sign language, or if you don't know sign language, you won't immediately realize what he's doing, because he just describes the signs that he's making towards his parents, so you're just as much clueless as a reader. I had Daniel sort of cue me in, because while I do speak German Sign Language to a certain extent, and I do understand it, I couldn't, from the written descriptions, deduct which signs he was talking about, so that was a bit beyond me. But that was really funny, and yeah, he basically pulled it off there. He was sort of calmed the school down, said his parents would take care of it, he'd get punished at home, and told his parents he was going to work on his grades, which really wasn't the issue. So I thought that was a really funny anecdote. And another really funny one was when, I'm just realizing I'm not holding the book this entire time. Another funny anecdote was he, as I said, he works in the theater, so he had a composition that was working both with deaf and with hearing actors and singers, and he had a hearing person meet a deaf person, and the deaf person pulls out a phone and then starts talking on it, and the hearing person is super irritated, and the deaf person was just making a joke. So yeah, I would, if you're interested in the subject matter, I would definitely recommend this one. Just be aware there's some like difficult to read passages, so for me it was sort of on the middling ground, the book. It wasn't like a perfect read for me, but it was still very interesting. And then the next one I read was an anthology for poetry. Sorry, there's a large insect flying towards me. Okay. So this is for young people. It's they have both a monthly prize they award for poetry and a yearly one. And this contained the winners of 2018, and it also had sort of some articles about them reading at the book fair and stuff like that. The reason I have this is because they read at our booth, the one that I'm working at the book fair, and so I got a copy of this because of that. And there was some really good poems in here. So you do have the poems by the young people that are they are between 10 and 20 years old, but you also have established poets in here as well. And the way it works is that every month they choose a poem by an established poet, a German one, and they also choose a piece of art from any museum in Germany, and then those are sort of writing prompts for the young people to write poems set against those prompts. And there was one poem that is by Dalibor Markovic, which works in many languages. It's in German, but it's also in English, and then I think it is Bosnian, I want to say. There is a video of that poem and the author reading it online, so I will link down below to that. Even if you don't speak German, you will, with English, you will comprehend sort of the meaning of the poem, I think. So I would encourage you to check that out. And then the last one that I read was a literary magazine. That is Literaturbote. That is the one literary magazine Daniel and I subscribe to. And it is put out by one of the literary houses in Frankfurt, and I know the people that work there, and one of them is also in the board of members, so technically one of my bosses. He's a really nice guy. And anyway, so yeah, this particular literary magazine edition is called Innere Landschaften, and came out in 2018. And it contained some short stories, some poems, so a little bit of everything, and an excerpt from a novel by Peter Kurzek. He's from Hessen, so the state that we live in, and he's sort of considered the Hessian James Joyce, and personally I like him better. There's two short stories in here. One was sort of this weird dystopian short story, and then one is about an earthquake and the effects that it has on one woman who, even after the earthquake, still continues to feel like the earth is shaking, and it's sort of getting to be sort of bit magical realist elements in there. So those were interesting. And then was the poetry. The ones that I liked best were by Friederike Hertha, who sadly doesn't have a poetry collection out yet, because I would definitely get that. There was this one poem called Beginnings, I guess you could translate it, and it's about her stomach rising and sort of erupting, and it takes you a moment to realize that it's about pregnancy, and I thought that was really cool, and about giving birth, so I really enjoyed those. So it was an interesting collection overall, and yeah, those were the first 5 German books that I read so far this year. If you have read any German books this year so far, please let me know which ones, and if you enjoyed them, or any German books that you would recommend in general. And I will talk to you next time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!